Well, it's again another time, another Thursday. And we are here on our regular, famous, favorite podcast, Crossroads Navigating Business Challenges. So I'm your host, David Etienne, and we've been accustomed to meeting here regularly on a Thursday, and this is another one such. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was on and I shared with you what I consider to be a very, very, very important topic, one that has its own unique challenges. So at that time, we spoke at length on some of the components, some of the things that are worthwhile considering. But of course, at that time, we spoke on it more from a theoretical perspective, textbook stuff. But I promised you that I'm going to arrange to have an individual who is knowledgeable of that subject matter. Why? Because he knows it, he lives it, he's enwrapped in it. He has been handling this phenomenon for the past 30 odd years. And so this evening, I have a very good friend and colleague, Mr. Seth Spurlock. Seth, welcome, sir. Welcome. Really happy to have you to discuss this very, very important topic. Well, before I jump into our discussions, I want the people to know exactly who is Seth Spurlock. So Seth is the founder and president of Bulk Chemical Services, a Georgia company that was formed back in 2005. And this is a company focused on the manufacturing of chemical products. So I like to say that, his company is everything about chemicals. Seth is also the president of the Georgia Mining Association and chair of the Committee for Good Government. Now, looking at Seth's bio, he has had a long involved history in corporate management, both at the local level and also internationally. So he comes to us with quite a bit of knowledge under his belt. Seth has, in his early days, completed his bachelor's in applied science. Then he went on to do a master's in business administration, and currently is pursuing a doctorate in business administration. So as we like to boast on this program, we look for people who are knowledgeable. We look for people who are engaged in the process. And so when they share with us, we're getting, yes, the perspective of the text, but more so the practitioner's point of view, the practitioner's experience. Now, Seth is a family man, hands down a family man. Seth is a religious man. Seth is an outdoors man. And so for me, I call Seth a man for all seasons. But this evening, we're going to zero in strictly on what we call the challenges. How do we navigate the challenges that faces family-owned and operated businesses? Because I am of the view that there are some unique challenges that other types of business will not have to contend with, but those are ever present in a family-owned and operated business. So without further ado, I'm very anxious to hear Seth, my brother. Thank you for joining, and I'm going to jump right in. And I want you to just give us a broad perspective as to your business, its origination, its growth over the years, and your general involvement in building this business.
Well, David, thank you. First of all, it's a pleasure to be on Crossroads. I had the opportunity to view some of the podcasts, and it's a phenomenal program, and you've had some really great speakers on there. So I'm really pleased and honored to be able to participate. So thank you for inviting me to do this. We've had some interesting conversations along the way that led up to this, but I think this is a really good opportunity to talk about that. And I think, family business sometimes is construed or seen as a smaller entity, and sometimes that is. But I think what most people don't realize, or maybe haven't thought about it, is I think 85 to 90% of the U.S. of the U.S. businesses are considered family businesses, And it's a phenomenal amount of the GDP in the country, something like 60 to 70%, $8 trillion. And actually, one out of three of the Fortune 500 companies last year are considered family businesses. So, I mean, it is a huge entity. And I know we always think about the large employment, that's what's always in the news, and family businesses tend to be as private entities like mine, hopefully off the radar screen. And, not a lot of information is shared about the financials and inner workings of those businesses, but it represents a significant part of the U.S. Economy.
Mm.
And I think it's interesting you're talking about. There are so many different areas in family businesses, and it really even starts with how they're defined. I mean, when you look up family businesses, it can be everything from the individual proprietorship and the one person working out there by themselves to much larger corporations. And so I think that's why the definition of family business and the amount of impact it has on the country is so important, because it covers such a wide range and partnerships and you know, multi-year businesses as well. But so thank you for that long introduction. I always, you've always told me it's about managing the expectations, and I'm not sure you manage those very well. You laid it all out there. So I think it's kind of, you said all things, all chemistry. So I will give you a reaction, and tell you
Yeah,
you've made
okay,
the,
sir.
the catalyst for me to try to rise up and make one of those better programs as we can go along. But I'll tell you a little bit about our business. Yeah, we are really just briefly. We're a chemical manufacturer. We handle hazardous materials. We make polymers and bactericides, things that go into paints and coatings, and water systems. We also service the paper industry, mining, water treatment systems, ceramic tiles, the floor tiles and bathroom tiles and things like that. So those are big users of our chemistry. And we have a big focus, as you can imagine, on environmental health and safety as part of that. And one of the differences, just to kind of get into the family part of this, is and private ownership is the business is a reflection of the people who own it. And so, I don't want to be associated with a company that has environmental issues or safety issues or legal consequences, or when people drive by them, one of the best compliments I get is, "Oh, I didn't realize that was a chemical plant," when they go by what we're doing. And I think that's very positive. And when people come into the plant, they see the housekeeping and how things are done, and that's a reflection on how we operate our business. Well, we started the business probably, I guess, coming on to 20 years.
Mm.
And it was very small, just a couple of employees. I had worked for a much larger chemical company and had was involved with private equity as well. And got out of that and decided to do something where I could keep it private longer term, because with private equity, ultimately you get to a point where, you want to sell, and that was a life-changing experience and very good for me. But I wanted to create something that we could build up and then preserve and then pass on if that's what we chose to do. So we started very small, and in anticipation of our discussion, I looked back over the years just yesterday and said, what's been our growth rate? And our CAGR, the compound growth rate over the last 18 years is about 13% on the revenue side. Uh, but more importantly, like always, it's what do you take home? And that's over that 18-year period is 24% on the profit side. And so year on year. And I mean, depending on how people view their business and the expectations, I'm very pleased to see that number. I was kind of surprised actually, and went back to double check my numbers, looking back where we started and where we are today. And so it's been very good year on year sequential growth, primarily in profitability. Our sales number can move around a little bit, only because we're dependent on some basic raw materials and our derivatives from oil and gas. So sometimes the top line will move, but the bottom line has almost been, I would say, if I maybe with one exception, uh, every year improvement in profitability and growth, and that's the number of people, that's the amount of profitability we bring in. And so it's been a very good run for the last 18 years. So I hope that gives you kind of just a
Oh,
feel for
yeah,
who we are.
certainly, certainly.
We
Um,
operate,
um,
yeah, in multiple states. So yeah.
right, right. I'm just thinking of the, as you speak, it crossed my mind, but I don't know that. I'm thinking of the COVID era, the COVID period. And so I'm trying to think of COVID in terms of the business, in the industry and the business that you're involved in, and wondering if your business is one that would have been impacted in a significant way Or is it a case where your business may just be one that thrived from, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Based on what you offer, what you provide, I don't know if that was something that was of great demand for whatever reason during the COVID period.
Yeah, that was even during the COVID period, we were able to continue to improve our profitability. We were deemed a essential manufacturer because we supply different industries and water processes and things like that. So we had to put in, as everyone else did, the implementation of, with the workforce of safety items and distancing and masks and all those things that we did at that time, which we thought were the best practices, of course. But we still continued to run. Um, our normal shifts, our normal production. And our volumes were somewhat slower, but not significantly, really, because a majority of our downstream customers were also deemed to be um, essential manufacturers. And ironically, as you said, some of the times some of the packaging and some of the changes in the products that they had to manufacture led to new opportunities for us to continue to grow our business. So it did impact our operations. It was a great unknown, but not really at all in terms of our growth and profitability. Yeah,
Okay,
so
great. The word family is so central. The word family is so central in that in our regular biological family, there are conflicts, challenges, contradictions, the need to manage certain dynamics in a normal biological family. In a business family, there's also a set of challenges that comes in a business, in the dynamics of a business. When I think of taking those challenges in a normal biological family and marrying them with the challenges of running a business, I'm thinking to myself, how does one navigate that? To me, that looks like I call it a two-headed monster, for want of a better term, because I'm saying, wow, especially when the head of the family unit is the head of the business unit. How do you navigate? How do you strike a balance to really handle the challenges that will come from that kind of a relationship?
yeah, that definitely it can be a conflict as you go along, and it depends. I mean, I have my own experience, and everybody probably has a different way of going about it, whether they're multi-generational or first generation, like in our case. But I have been involved as a president of a company for over 30 years, and my oldest child is, a little over 30. So, that's all they've known is that's what I've done. And some of them grew up when the company is just privately owned now. And so they've been part of that along the way. And I think there are sometimes the natural conflicts that come into it. And sometimes it's expectations on my part of my own children, and I try to set them up for that. And I'll just go down a couple of these little tangents because there's so many areas to talk about this. But you prompted me to think about my own children being in the business, and all of them. I have four children and two girls, two boys, and they've all worked in the company at different times, different tasks along the way, depending on where we were and their particular interests. None of them work in the business right now, which is kind of interesting as well. And I'm thinking and learn more about this in a little bit is that that will change over time because they're out there doing their own thing and following their own vision for their life. But I think that as part of doing that, they may see that maybe there are some merits of the family business and what that provides for them.
Right.
But as far as like setting expectations and where it can go positive or negative, I mean, I would use this as a time when my children were younger, and I would say even still today is before we have a company event that involves employees or our customers or an industry, and they've been involved in all of those type of functions. We typically talk about, okay, who's coming? What are we trying to do there? We have certain guidelines and boundaries around, personal habits and things we're going to do. It may even be as so direct as between my wife and I to say, that would not be an appropriate thing to wear, this would be a better thing to say, these are the things we don't discuss. And so we do all that. Sometimes I do it in writing if I'm not, going to see my children to the event. Sometimes I, have a short conversation with them ahead of time. And then I even would have a, what we maybe call it a post-mortem, or whatever you want to say is, these are things that went really well. These are things we could improve on, because it's the perception and the of community leaders or industry or customers or employees as to who are these people and how does our family interact, and do they want to be part of that, or is there conflict and compromise and inappropriateness? And so you're right. If it goes well, David, it can be a beautiful and wonderful thing, and you get all these nice comments. Oh, your children are this and that. And when you don't get them, you always wonder, well, what happened, and sometimes, and so it's pressure. And I tell them, this is not a party. This is an entertainment event for us to build relationships with our customers. And it's not just customers. And we sometimes we have industry uh, or regulators there, or maybe a local state representative, or whoever it might be. I mean, they attend industry functions. You mentioned some of those industry functions, like the Georgia Mining Association, where my family will be there, and we'll meet with the governor. And my wife and I sat with them with Governor Kemp last year for breakfast. And so it's all about those kind of things, and what do we want to say and what do we not want to say. And sometimes people have strong opinions. Like if I said to you, what would you like to say if you could, talk to the governor, you might just unleash, but yet he's our guest, so we have to be, and I try to make them aware of that. If you want to go talk to the governor, there he is, at some other event. And you can probably tell by my tone, it gets to be like, here's what we need to do as the company, and as the father and as the owner and president, this is how we need to interact, and they've done an excellent job, and they are great ambassadors for the company. And they were there when they were employees, and how they interacted, and also as adults now, and they're a great asset, and they really can be. So I agree with you. I can see where you could see that dichotomy of it can be really bad, but it also can be really good. And I try to take the extra means to talk with them about it, so there's just not an expectation or a disappointment on either side. And by and large, it's worked very well. So I don't know, is that kind of what you were
Oh
thinking
yeah,
of?
certainly,
And there's so many
because
different elements to that.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
there's the
that's right.
employment
That's right.
element.
There's so many
Yeah.
angles to it, you see. And yeah, that's right. Now, this leads me right into my next question is that as a business owner, operator, a lot of experience, you know what it is to make sound, strategic business decisions. And I have a saying, I've always said this to my staff and to others. If you find yourself factoring non-business variables in making a business decision, you're potentially courting disaster. And I'm going to repeat, if you find that you're looking at variables that are not business related or business driven variables, and you're using those things to make a business decision, you're courting disaster. Having said that, I'm aware that there must be times when what I call family priorities are not quite aligned with what would be considered sound business decision. And I'm going to take a very loose example. There may be something happening at a point in time within the family circle that requires the expenditure of a sum of funds. And that is what is necessary for the good of the family. But if you look at the source of the funds, which would be the business, it may not be the right timing or the best business decision at that point in time to expend that kind of money. So there can never be harmony in those two factors. How do you handle that when your family priorities are not quite aligned with sound business decisions?
Yeah, I think your observation about the potential downside to that event happening is 100% correct. It could be a disaster for your business,
Mhm.
and it also can be harmful to your family if they see that. And it does take a certain amount of discipline to do that. And it really started at the very beginning when I started the business about even putting in the equity to start. I acquired a small operation, and that required a significant commitment that my wife got behind. And then, but I also like boundaries and putting a box around it. And this is how I do it. And I know other companies and other families who have faced a lot of big problems for the issue that you talk about, that you brought up, because whatever you want to call it, they milk the business. They're constantly, taking money out of the business for the family priorities. And that's where they place their priority. And I understand that, but at the same time, if you are taking all the money from your business or for your family and putting it into your business and it goes wrong, yeah, you have destroyed your personal family wealth and the relationships that go with that. And so that's another of the many minefields that are out there to be managed. I can just tell you what I did. I mean, which is we got together and we took a certain amount of money that we were willing to invest in this and negotiated a transaction for the small operations that we work out of down here to start with, and said that is it. From there we're going to grow organically. I said from there that is what I will put into the business. I may continue to reinvest out of it, which is what we did for a number of years at the very beginning, to build it up. But it only came out of the proceeds of the business. So I wasn't taking more money from the family to do that. But and it worked. I mean, that's the thing, that's always the trouble. It's like when you get into some big projects you really want to do, how do you fund that and how do you finance it? But I had decided early on I was going to live within that means and what we made out of the business and reinvest in it. And now it's become, much larger by the numbers I've told you. I mean,
Gotcha.
a significant investment in terms of capital and people and what's involved in it. So I think it's a challenge, and I think you hit it exactly right. And you have to make sure going into it, where are you going to fund either the family events or the business events? And if you're going to take a certain salary out of the business, it doesn't become everybody's, honeypot to start digging out of it. Like, you could do this, you could do that. There's lots of things you could do. And having strong controls over that and strong financials over that are very important. And I think that's how we managed it. I think it depends on size, but the very beginning is very tempting. And even now, we reinvest a significant amount of money back into capital projects because the chemical industry is very capital intensive, to build new projects. But I do that with a balance between what we want to invest in the business and also making sure that we're still meeting our long-term, financial planning with my wife and I. And we have been very, just cut to the chase a little bit. We've been very blessed and fortunate in how that works out. And my wife and I have been married for 39 years, going on 40 years. And we live in the same house we've lived in for 30 something years, and so we live a life that's not constantly drawing on a higher demand, and that's very comfortable. And I'll tell you the other principle that we live off of is that we're a debt-free family and a debt-free company. And so, to get there is a huge undertaking.
Mhm.
And everybody will point out to you, the world's full of people telling you how you can run your business. But you can go out and borrow all kinds of money. We can do all kinds of crazy things. We could buy a different house, and that's all wonderful until it isn't, right? And then
That's
the debt
correct.
bomb
That's
comes home
correct.
to you. And
That's correct.
when you've got that money sitting there and you can weather the storms, that is a great feeling, and it has benefited us over the probably the last 15 years where we finally just had everything done since starting this business, and then just kind of work within the harvest that we were able to have, and that's it's a very good feeling. It's a great way to operate your business.
What would you consider are some of the, and I keep saying the word unique because I would imagine other business structures or types or ownership types do enjoy some of these things too, but maybe things that are unique to family. So we talk about family-owned businesses. What are some of the benefits? So in other words, I'm trying to think, Seth could have gone and decided, I'm going to establish my company, hire, persons outside. So in other words, just your typical business that hires strangers off the bat, etc. What are some of the benefits that you have experienced that maybe it is in hindsight, because maybe you're not thinking about, but in hindsight, you say, wow, going the family business, family involvement, as opposed to going out there was one of the best decisions that I could have made.
Yeah.
What stands?
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of benefits, I think, in challenges, opportunities and challenges, like in every business, and some are unique to these private ownership, family structures. The biggest benefit for me was personally is just I wanted to see how good I could be in the industry. What can you accomplish if you go out and do it on your own? And the American and the US market is extremely competitive. I think the most competitive marketplace in the world. If you want to find out how good you are, go out and start your own business. And the marketplace will reward you, but it'll also find any weaknesses that you may have. And I got to a point where I'd seen us build up a very nice business. And unfortunately, as part of that structure of after 7 or 8 years, we had to sell it because that was, the understanding going into it. So I wanted to take something that I could, if it was successful, I could perpetuate if that's what I chose to do. And so family ownership or private ownership allows you to do that, which is unique. If you're a public company or you're working in a different entity, you don't have the chance to do that. And the other is I had certain ideas about how I wanted to operate the business, as I said, in a debt-free manner. I understand we had $100 million of syndicated debt in these companies where we did acquisitions, all this really fun, interesting stuff. But at the end of the day, you got a tremendous amount of debt. And I wanted to see, can we pull this off? Can we make this happen and live our life in a comfortable way and still grow and fund it through the cash flow of the business. And so you can kind of prove out the things you always wanted to do because you can control it. And you can also set the standards and the culture for the business. You're not in somebody else's culture. And companies succeed in so many different ways, and they have different cultures. And when we recruit people, we try to find people who want to fit into our culture, and the things we value and the things that we say how we want to operate and how we're going to treat each other. And that is to me is critical to bringing in good high quality talent. Because I told you I don't have a family member sitting there in line who's been, groomed and all the stuff to set up. And I have other solutions for that to keep the business going long term. But I have been able to bring in some excellent people that want to be part of the culture and part of the business, part of the growth, and have that same belief system. And that has been tremendous. I mean, those are the people who are there today. And we may talk about if we have time on this, succession and transition and all that stuff.
I'm definitely touching on that.
Okay.
Certainly.
That's a whole. I mean,
that's a whole new bug.
Oh my God.
Yes, sir.
And it's just fraught with challenges, but
that's correct.
At the same time, I would tell you, I have a contingency plan because we're only good for now until whatever
until you're not good anymore. That's right.
One more click on the line. We just don't know. So I mean, part of my responsibility is I update that, and it's only I know about it. Only I know what it is, and it's sealed, and it's in an attorney's office, and they don't even know what it is because I like to reserve the right to change that, but I update that all the time to make sure that my family. And they can follow it if they want to or they don't, but it's going to say, here's what we need to do. This is how it should be done. And that's a bridge between.
Hold that thought for a while. Hold that thought for a while, because I mean, as you rightly say, we could just take that succession planning and just blow it out of the water. Hold that. I'm coming back to it though, Seth. I'm coming back to it because there are some areas of that subtopic that I really want to explore in depth. But let's turn to the question of legacy. The word legacy. Now, a number of small family-owned businesses, they have as one of their priorities, legacy. I want to create something that will pass on to my next kin, my generations down the line. And so there's a focus on legacy, and you hear people talk with pride. this business has been in my family and I'm the third generation
Right.
of, etc. And yes, it is something that is worth celebrating. My question though is there a possibility that in a family-owned setting, the emphasis on legacy may be what is fueling the continuity of the business? But had it not been hinged on legacy, the real economic conditions or circumstances of that business would have dictated that it be dissolved a long time ago. So in other words, people are holding on to this thing, and so when you hear, oh man, this business has been around for 25, 30 years. However, if you look at it closely, maybe 15 of those 25 years in a typical non-family owned businesses would have said, you know what? The economics of this thing say it's time to close shop, but legacy overrules. Talk to me about that, because I expect that if it doesn't affect you or impact you, you must be sensitive to that sort of, dynamic there.
Yes, and I have seen that before, where the business continues on, and things happen along the way. The family members that they were going to pass it to leaves, and so they built this legacy business that now has no one to pass it to or no structure. And you're right, the business can also run its course, its life cycle. And
That's
if you're not
correct.
renewing
That's
that,
correct.
that's the danger. And the danger is sometimes it's people like myself, the founder, that are the biggest problem, because you get to the point where you run it up, you have all this, and I say run it up, you invest all the time, and you achieve success. And so then you say, well, do I want to do this? I want to do these other things. And so you get away from the business, and it can plateau or it can even fall off because you're not bringing that same energy, but yet you haven't transitioned or you don't want to transition. So I think your point is exactly right. That definitely can happen. And there are things you have to do to preserve that, and you have to be aware of it. And I'd like to think you have to be astute enough about your own where you're at in that life cycle to say, have we reached that point? Because one of the reasons I got into the program was to do exactly that. The program, the company was to do exactly that. Get something that I could pass on to my family if that's what they want to do, and build something that could last, who knows, 100 years. I won't be here, but just it's a organization and an entity that can go on under the right conditions. Having said that, that probably started 5 or 6 years ago when I talked to my family about it originally. But in that process, I realized how difficult that really is, because when you study businesses, family businesses, you realize that only 30% of them, David, make it to the second generation.
Wow.
And only 13% of them make it to the third. 13%. And only 3 make it to the fourth. And so I looked at that and said, why is that? And I started trying to read about it and study about it. And that's really one of the primary factors, if not the factor, that put me into the program, in this doctorate program, because I've said, I'm not studying it enough to really conquer this problem or understand it well enough to try to structure something to be one of the 3%. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Right.
And so, and everybody would tell you, and this is just typical for, I think, founders, entrepreneurs, and owners, or whatever we are, and I put you into that category as well. You have your own business. And I said, if all the known consultants, business practices, professors, and writers, if that's their track record, surely I can do better than that. I think, I mean, that was my thing. I'm going to learn as much as I can about this, because I'm not going to have somebody tell me what I need to do unless they have 6 companies, they all got to that 3%. And what I realized is, sustainability is extremely complex, with lots of different avenues and lots of pitfalls along the way that I think could make just a series of discussions, papers, research, and you do that. But at the same time, the clock is running. So, I mean, I have to make decisions about what to do, how to do it. And I'm implementing my own plan based on what I've learned, and you can come back in 3 generations and see whether I pulled it off or not. But that's the challenge, and I think it is to be self-aware, to your point, of where are you in that process, and is it time to, as we say, ring the register? You know what I mean? Cash out, do whatever, because there's so much, there's so many opportunities to do that if you do it at the right time. And that also can have a lasting legacy for your family. It
Gotcha.
doesn't have to be the business if that's not what they want. And
Right.
we haven't talked about at all about kind of the core values of the business and the business principles. And because I think that runs throughout the whole business for me. And you were generous to say, a person of faith at the beginning. And I think that's where it starts. You have to know and trust. And I build my foundation on a Christian and on Christ. And so I start with that. And literally, one of the things I always tell people, what's carved in stone for your business? I mean, what's really there in stone? And sitting on my desk, somebody laughed when I first told them about this, is I actually have carved in stone, that I carved myself. And the first thing it says, it has 4 C's. So I had to start with C for some reason, I don't know why. But the first thing is Christ, and so that permeates the business. And why does that impact our discussion now? Because it's what we said about the legacy and about what we're building and about passing it to your family. If that's not God's will for me, for the company, or for my children, the last thing I want to do is get in the way of that. So I facilitate it. I try to do everything I can do, and then just see as you shake the sifter, what's going to come out of it. All of them are good options, but I want my children to go live their God's will wherever it is and whatever business that is. So I can't be upset if they're not currently working in the business. But I can also talk to them about, let them see what's going on in life, see if it makes time, if it makes sense in time. But you can start with that, and that's also what creates the culture of the business, not the particular Christian faith, but the principles that come out of that. Morality, ethics, how you treat people, how we conduct our business, safety. That's the umbrella that everything gets looked at. It's not about, oh, we're in polymers, but we're not in, some other type of chemistry. That's irrelevant. It's how we operate and who are we and how do we conduct ourselves and how we run our operations. That's what's most important. And then after that, we've got our business principles about how we're going to operate in safety and quality and, keeping our ISO standards and all those things. Right. And so it just kind of works down. And that also works in the family, it works in the business, and it's just the culture that people will want to come into. And so that's I guess if you don't see that theme, I would have missed saying it to you, because that's what runs through the business.
Got you.
Okay.
Time waits on no man. And so there comes a time where, yes, the older or the first generation, let's call it that, they are moving along, coming close to that time when they will exit. The younger generation, they are the ones who are now taking over the controls. When we think about culture and ethos, and you spoke, you ethos, and you mentioned, you alluded to it, it would be good, it would be clean and seamless if there could be a designated time period where the first generation handles this business and hand it over to the next, But it doesn't work that way. There comes a time when there is a merger, okay? There's a fusion between the culture, the attitudes of that older generation who knows exactly how this business was built, the relationship with customers, the care for people outside of just being a transaction, okay? Okay, as we move on, the focus, the emphasis in running a business by the younger generations tend not to be so much focused on those, what I call key elements. So you come to that point where you are accepting that your son, your grandsons will have to take over. But you see that, oh, the way they're moving this company is not quite the way that I had built it over the years. How do you handle that? And I'm not necessarily talking about them recklessly going about doing it crazy, but you can see that there's a significant shift. And you say, man, oh, how do I allow my company to lose some of those fundamental foundation pillars on which I built it? But you must. Talk to me about that challenge.
Yeah. That's a whole nother You could have a whole nother podcast on that one,
Okay, yes,
or
okay.
a whole season.
That's
Yeah,
it. That's a
yeah,
dynamism of your
yeah,
area, man. I tell you. I mean,
yeah.
this is just something.
No, and it's a lot to think about. As you said, one of the quotes I had seen is "All men are mortal." Right? That's Aristotle. It
Yes,
goes
sir.
way back, and we all know that. And I think we all face that as we go forward. But I think it's the challenge of building corporate governance around how do you structure the transition and what authorities do you give and who do you surround people with. And that's the difference. That's a fundamental difference, I think, sometimes when you're the first generation, because you're out there, you're doing it all, and doing it all being not all the work itself, but I mean, in the current business like I'm structured, and maybe a lot of them, I'm the financier, the banker, I'm the board
Marketer,
because I
everything.
don't have a board
Mhm.
because I did it as, look, I want to go do this for myself. I don't like a lot of input sometimes, and I'm also the president, CEO of the company and run the operations and hire the people and do all those things. So you're kind of you've got all the authority, right? But will that stay the same once I transition? The answer would be absolutely not. It just can't be, and that has to be passed on to a CEO of the company, people who are on the board, and there's a difference even between the ownership structure and the management. I mean, we may have professional managers who run the business, and I tend to think of it sometimes more as we're a business family than we are a family business, and it's a different kind of orientation because we have this business, we have a couple other small businesses. We also have, some office buildings and things like that that we operate. And so you can put all that together into this little mini operation and have it structured from a board level perspective. There are different ways to organize it, but then making sure that you have outside board members, people with some experience, different backgrounds than what you have, and then very good, operational management within the business. And that at some point, what I hope is that you have enough time with them to transition, and work through the board kind of discussions so that they understand why certain decisions were made and then they get enough experience themselves. But ultimately, you can't, I would never try to, control somebody from, once I'm retired or from the grave, you know what I mean? And a lot of people do that. They put in these
Right.
corporate governance, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's like if you don't have that much faith in people, man, again, I go back to my beliefs. So I'm trying to structure this and say, here it is, and I've done everything I do. If it goes horribly wrong, I mean, I won't care. I'll be somewhere else, right? But that's the best I think you can do, and then you just got to live with it. And they may make choices that are bad, but you know what? I'm humble enough to believe they can make some really, really good choices that might be way better than I ever would have done. And I always tell my children and some of the people who may succeed after me is that don't ever say, "Oh, he'd be really surprised to see the business, at this level." I would never be surprised at that. If it's 150 million or if it's a 2.5 billion, it would not surprise me at all. We have the right people, we have the right structure, we have the right culture. I don't see why we couldn't do all those things and create opportunities for multiple generations because it's built on those foundations,
That's right.
Um,
That's right. You
and that's,
gave me some
but I mean,
statistics at at the beginning of our talk. You quoted some statistics in terms of business failures as they move through the generational stages. Would I be correct to say that quite often the family-owned businesses find that quite often they go under, they are dissolved, they are broken apart, whatever, once they're handed down to, let's just say, the present generation of family members. And in addition to that, I want to ask, do you think that it is because of the opportunities that the youngsters now have compared to back in our days? Okay, the possibilities, the opportunities are so many out there for you to go and do and be, that they consider being tied down into a family business is really stifling, restricting all the possibilities that are out there. And so the minute the older generation pass on this business to the younger ones, they more see it as a shackle than anything else. How do we get this thing out of the way?
Right. Yeah. I think that could be the view, and that's one of the reasons why I don't want to insist my own family has to do this. It's some cultures. I'm talking about outside the U.S. and some, family cultures say that, oh, you're my son, you're my daughter, you're the oldest, you have to do
That
this.
you gotta
And
do
suddenly
right.
yeah. And I don't do that, but I do see where it can happen. And I think I'm sure it's not in English, but in Chinese, it's the shirt sleeves in three generations. It's the same thing. It's not just the US, and it's been around for centuries. You know, the founder starts, the second generation has been part of that. So like my children, they work hard, they do all this. It's the third generation that has no appreciation for it. And they've lived, if your business is successful, they've lived a very nice life. I mean, frankly, you know what I mean? I mean, they're traveling, they're doing all these wonderful things, going to really good schools, doing all this stuff because they're the beneficiaries of that. And they don't have any appreciation for that hard work. And whether that's opportunities, as you're saying, or well, I should just say, there is so much written about why does it fail. You can get it from one to the next generation. You just hand it over and you say, oh, I've already made it to that 30%. But for that generation then to bring up their children, or in my case, grandchildren, or the next generation after that, is where it really, really falls off. And it has to do, I think part of it is opportunities. Part of it is, I think also, families insisting that somebody do something that they want to get away from. Um, you know, I the literature, as you know, is just full of people studying this phenomenon. And that's what I said. The more I learned about it, the more concerning it gets to be because you can see all the different elements and you see the concerns of the employees inside the company, like, well, who's going to do this? What's the structure going to be? I mean, that has a direct bearing on them.
That's right.
And that's understandable. And so, you got to talk about that internally, but also with the family members. If you pick not the oldest, but the second because they're more competent or they're more whatever, I don't know. I mean, then you start destroying your own family, fiber. And that's one of the things I said to my children is when my wife and I met with them and talked about it, it's kind of like, look, I don't want to do anything that's going to disrupt the relationships in the family. That's what there's no comparison. I mean, I'd rather just, do whatever, give the company away before I do that. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, then you build something that actually becomes negative. And David, you see this all the time. I mean, you see families just implode, and you see the bigger ones that have got billions of dollars in their family net worth in the Wall Street Journal because they're public, and they collapse over these internal struggles. And you think, I mean, you already got so much wealth, but yet it's just never, it never works. And it's very sad. And if I could guard against that, and if I got to that point, I'd want to not do anything, to jeopardize that. I would rather just, maybe leave them some cash, maybe go spend it all. I don't know. But, that's the last thing I think most people want to do. But sometimes it's the egos of the founders that just get in the way.
Certainly.
It's like, no, I'm building this tabernacle to myself.
That's
It's like
correct.
that's the last thing I would do.
That's correct. You earlier on, and I know you said a lot about it, and I just want to get a little pointed up. You spoke of succession planning. Hands down, Seth, that is lacking, woefully lacking in our small family business arena, succession planning. So usually we find that people react to, oh boy, suddenly ill health knocks, and so we have to make some quick adjustment. How do we continue? Or whatever. So that's succession. But I mean, I'm really take my hat off to you because that is woefully lacking. We all know that we will one day have to move along. What do you think is the reason, or are the reasons, why there's such a reluctance to engage actively in succession planning?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think it's a good way to phrase it and kind of look at it because when I originally started looking at this myself, it was in 2020. So it's been 4 years now. Thinking about what would that look like, and one of the statistics I saw was, and is exactly your point. 8 out of 10 family companies have no succession plan, zero. Don't even talk. Yeah, And so 80%. And then there's really negative numbers around, well, if disaster strikes, 60% of those companies go out of business in the next 3 years. In other words, it just collapse, it just takes that long to turn away. So it is very important. But I think the reasons are, I mean, of course, we all think we're going to live, for a long period of time, but we both have used interesting quotes to say we know that, and then we know that it's not going to happen. We know, common sense provide, but a lot of people, David, don't see it that way. They think things are going to go on forever, and so they just don't want to face it. The other is it's extremely difficult. I mean, difficult both in planning and knowing what to do and where do you turn. People say, "Oh, call this consultant, call this lawyer, call this accountant, call this CPA." And all those people have elements in that, and everybody has an opinion, and so what you need to do is this, and it gets to be overwhelming because it's just like, oh my gosh, and then you got to write all this down and you got to structure the business, and then to me, it's like you try to do it in confidence and in confidentiality, because if you start saying, okay, next year at this time I'm going to retire and this is going to happen, then you're a lame duck. And they say, oh, your name is David? Oh, I don't like David, or oh, I like David a lot, and I'm going to start going to him and ignore you. And so, there's all those dynamics of positive or negative, and employees who go, okay, well, that decision's made. I'm clearly not going to get there, so I'm going to go find something else. And all those things could happen, and you have to anticipate how do you handle all those, in addition to doing what you were doing the day before you decided you need to have a transition plan. And so I kind of ran into that as well. And I saw you can't just part-time it. And so I made a commitment to study it and try to come up with a plan. But I've also engaged, financial people like yourself, consultants, major law firms. And, a lot of times it comes down to, it can be very frustrating and very challenging because people say, well, what do you want to do? And it's like, well, what are my options? Well, your options are whatever you want to, and you go in this circle,
That circle. You're on in
and
circle. You're on in circle.
what are the pros and cons? And they say, oh, this is all great, unless they change the tax law, which they always do, and you could do it this way, and structure it like that. And so, and you have, you have a working on your doctorate as well, and you have a master's degree, and you're in the financial world, so you're well versed in all this. But a lot of companies, they're around the technology, they're IT people, they're whatever. They don't really want to think about this stuff because it's the bureaucracy of the business. And so I think that's another reason why. It's just I'll get to it tomorrow. I'll get to it next year. And you stir up a hornet's nest, and then you think, okay, why did I hit the hornet's nest? I mean, and so I try to do it on my own, and I say on my own with consultation, but in confidentiality, because that's also one of the principles that's carved in stone on my little desk thing is confidentiality. Because everybody wants to know your business. Everyone wants to know who you are, when you do this, or, who's going to do this, tell us about that. And nobody can keep a secret. Nobody can keep things confidential. And so if you can have that as a principle, and I don't mean secrecy in a negative way, but I mean just keeping people's confidence. If you tell me something, I don't go out and say, oh, Dave's got some issues going. Yeah, don't talk to him about it. If you can do that, you can really help build a culture that's positive, and you can also get on with some of these things that are around transitions. I mean, to go back to your question, those are the things I do, and I can only share why I saw it and the problems that were there and how I try to address it as best I can. And, I'm not sure, only time will tell whether that's the correct way to go.
That's right. That's right. Seth, we have had quite a bit that we have on our bed, and it's obvious that we have not even scratched the surfaces yet. It's obvious. But I'm really, really grateful that you were able to join us, man, because that's a lot of valuable information. In closing, wrapping it up, if you were to give, let me see, from the desk of Seth, sort of 2-3 pointers, salient pointers, what would they be? If you're speaking to a set of guys who are running a family business, you say, man, if nothing else, these 3 things ought to be at the top of your list, at the top of your focus and attention. What would those things be?
Yeah, and this is at the risk of repeating myself, but I think you've heard them throughout, because if I didn't think if I bringing them up at the last minute, it probably wouldn't have been so important. But I think it's creating the corporate culture. I mean, who are you and how are you going to operate? And it's the same thing for your business or anybody else. Who are you? What where do you draw those principles from? I talked about where I draw mine from, but you have to know who you are because as these other items come in, you have to filter them through that. Who are we going to hire? How do we hire? How do we promote? What do we do? How do we treat people? That's probably the first thing you have to do to me and write it down. Say, these are my core beliefs and principles. And if something comes against that, I have to have the courage and my convictions to say no.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
the second is our customers. I mean, it seems so obvious, but if don't have a customer, you are not in business. You're just screwing around, printing your business cards and working on your website and doing 10 million other things. It's about the customer and understanding what they're looking for. And, it sounds really crazy, but giving it to them. I mean, how hard is that? But it seems like it's so difficult with people running these massive enterprise systems and having all the internal meetings and worrying about the social programs and all this other stuff. It's find the customers and serve them extremely well because that's what we focus on. If the customer calls up in a short lead time, sorry to the plant, sorry we have to work the weekend, but the customer needs to be there because they're going to be there year after year when you do those things.
Correct,
And so if you can, you know,
Mhm, mhm.
keep your business away from the bureaucracy and keep the bureaucracy out of it so it doesn't slow down with long lead times and all these other things that people tell you about. And for example, we build the inventory. We don't make 90% of what we do is we manufacture the inventory. So when that customer calls, it's ready. It's not because I'm not aware of the cost of inventory or how to manufacture just in time, but it's because they call up and we can deliver chemicals in a bulk truck anywhere within a driving distance they can get to. But we can load a truck in 2 to 3 hours and it can be on the road going to anywhere in the country or being shipped out, not scheduled in production for 2 weeks from now.
Mhm.
And it's those kind of focuses, that you can have, I think. And the last one is because you said three, but is cash. I mean, that's the other seed that's in my stone, and that is and I use that as a term to say avoid debt. Avoid debt. I mean, it just and it goes back to my number one thing, which is scriptural, which is the borrower becomes a slave to the lender.
How can you say that when we operate on the platform of an economy that sits on debt? That is our bedrock. I mean, that's what make things happen.
It's uh, it's a it's a time related issue. It's coming. It's coming. Do you ask me why is gold at $2,500 an all time high? Why is that? Why are people buying real estate? And there's people who are hedging against that. And I would just say, if you need to buy a house, obviously you put your money down, you get a mortgage, you do all this stuff. But if you had to borrow money as an individual and get in a huge debt to buy a Mercedes, maybe you should just buy a Ford. I mean, you can still live within your means, and your life is so much better. And so when we as a company, could you ask me what's the difference or what's key is when we see things we want to buy, capital equipment, we go and buy them because we have money in the bank to go do them. And we see a capital project we want to do, like build this, do that. Or hire somebody, we're not in debt. I'm not answering to the banks on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis. I don't send my financials to anyone. And so we're not spending any time doing all that stuff. And it frees you up then to do the things you want to do. And when you have money in the bank, as you know, it gives you freedom, it gives you options. Doesn't mean you have to spend it.
Great.
And you're making
Great,
money on your
great,
money.
great,
And
great.
yet you're right. The mentality is
Mhm.
about debt,
Yeah.
debt,
Mhm.
debt, debt. And
That's right.
the banks will loan you and private equity more money than you even ask for.
Certainly.
It's like, oh yeah, here's this,
Certainly.
and then here's some more to do something with. So if you can avoid those things, you set
Mhm.
yourself up with the right structures, focus on the customers, and you got the cash, run the process and the business will prosper. At least it has for us. And so that's
Got you.
been our
Got you. Got you. Got
I
you.
hope that, maybe
Got you.
longer than you wanted, but that was the
No, no,
answer. That's
no. Oh man, no, no, certainly not. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised, and I'm going to be presumptuous enough to say I delivered, not because of my competence in finding the right person, but because of the quality of person that we bring onto this show. That was none other than Seth Spurlock, the man that, as I said before, live the walk and live the talk. That's life for him. And so he has shared with us all those fundamentals. And it's a lot. And as you hear, we could have gone on maybe until midnight and still not thoroughly cover this topic. But I trust and hope that as we bring these programs to you from time to time, that it will at least start the thought process so that you can be aware that there are and there will always be challenges. And quite often, there's no way to totally erase or eliminate them. But there is that roadmap. And there are some critical components along that walkway, along that path, that if we are aware of them, if we are sensitive to them, and if we obey the principles, the guiding principles, then there will be a way for us to navigate these challenges. So Seth, my man, I cannot say thank you enough, sir. Really appreciate you coming onto the program. And certainly I know when you and I, are having a little regular chats, that we will have quite a bit more to talk about. Quite a bit more.
David,
so
I just want to thank you for
thank you very much, man. And before I go, I just want to share with my listeners. Early days when I met Seth, I looked at the man, and I'm looking at his beard, and I thought to myself, which come first? Do you need to grow a beard like that to become wise? Or is it a natural outgrowth of being wise? So I had to ask the man, which came first? You're wise and so you grow this wise looking beard, or you first have to grow a beard like that to become wise? We don't know the answer, but that's the man with the well-adorned, wisdom-filled head and beard. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Wonderful. You always get the last word. So
I tried
to.
I tried to, Seth. I tried.
I enjoyed the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Seth. Have a good one. Now we'll be talking.
Thank you. Okay. Good
So,
evening.
ladies and gentlemen, that's it for me for now. And thank you for joining us once again on Crossroads, Navigating Business Challenges. So until next time, when we'll again explore another topic that we hope will make you better businessmen and better business women. Good night for now. Have a good one.